I'm going to take you on a journey which will probably make you cry. And hopefully by the end of it, if I'm able to talk with this talking stick, give you an incredible feeling of hope. Because without the support of people like you and millions of other people around the world, we are going to lose our rhinos and our elephants, but not just yet. Just to give you a little bit of background, this pic is not photoshopped. I spent 9 years of my life heading up an organization called Project Rhino. I'll get into it later, but in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, where the rhino poaching crisis has got really bad. And this beautiful boy was shot in the stomach by a poaching gang, along with 3 others. If anybody has ever had appendicitis, you'll have a slight idea of what the pain and suffering a gut wound does to an animal. And he died 5 days later. And we found him. Too late. The trade in wildlife products is not a new thing. It's been going on for millennia. The ancient Egyptians used to trade gold, ebony, ivory, along with rhino horn and frankincense to all their trading partners around the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Coming forward a little bit closer in history, during the slave trade in Africa that lasted for 300 years, tens of millions of slaves that were captured in the interior of this great continent that we call home were also used as human beasts of burden to carry ivory and rhino horn to the coasts of Africa to be sold into the Middle East, into the Mediterranean area, into Europe, and into China and Vietnam, along with their human cargo. Coming even further into modern day history, in the 1800s, when Africa was suddenly discovered by the Western world, and the colonial powers began carving up this magnificent continent, the early explorers and the colonialists and the hunters came in, and they shot hundreds of thousands of Africa's wildlife, believing that these plains of this great continent would never ever be depleted. Millions of animals. And I'm sure you've all seen pictures of the early Victorian days where it was de rigueur to have a set of ivory tusks in your house, or a hippopotamus foot as a footstool, or a rhino horn as a doorstep. It got so bad in those days that the early explorers, Dr. David Livingstone and Frederick Courtney Selous, began to speak out very forcefully. And both of them, on 2 separate occasions, addressed the Natural History Museum in London and spoke out really forcefully and said, if this kind of slaughter continues, and this is in the 1800s, Africa will have no more wildlife. So the problems have been coming for a long, long time. In the 1980s and the early 1990s, that was the beginning of the modern day era of wildlife poaching. And despite the great efforts of these hunters of the 1800s, thousands and thousands of Africa's big game remained. There were 120,000 rhino spread throughout the whole of Africa, and even more elephants. And every now and then I'm going to touch on elephant and lion and pangolin, because what I talk about rhino is endemic to all the other game and species that are endangered. But in the 1980s, the first organized wave of wildlife poaching came, and it centered on East Africa. And here's a little statistic for you. From 120,000 black rhino, they're nearly all gone. In the Serengeti, who's been to Tanzania and who's been to the Serengeti? Yeah, quite a few of you. That used to be home to 700 black rhino. In 6 years, there were only 10 left. In the Zambezi River Valley, one of the world's greatest wildlife paradises that used to teem with rhino, there's not one left. Kingsley, Mike, and I, and the rest of the team did an expedition a couple of years ago to go from source to mouth along the whole 2,400 kilometers Zambezi River. We didn't see one rhino. In Central and West Africa, not one rhino remains. And last year, I'm quite sure many of you would have heard the news that Sudan, the last remaining male northern white rhino, died, thankfully of old age, in a protected area in northern Kenya. He's the last of a species. The two females that are left, two, out of a range of the northern white rhino that used to number in the tens of thousands, there are two females left, and they cannot breed. Now, strangely, Southern Africa seemed to escape that wave of rhino poaching. And the white and black rhino populations of Southern Africa actually did really well. They increased. And in our province of KwaZulu-Natal, there were conservationists who pioneered the relocation of rhino from little pockets back into other parts of Southern Africa. It was a huge conservation success story. And South Africa became known as the home of the rhino in Africa. Until 10 years ago, when the first rifle shots began to ring out in our game reserves. We've lost over 8,000 rhino in South Africa alone. That's 3 rhino a day. And you'll see down here in the corner, 2019, we're still sitting on 41. That's actually getting better, and I'll get into the reasons why. Why is there such a demand for rhino horn? Well, it's because of ancient medicinal beliefs in China and Vietnam, traditional Chinese medicine, which has been around for thousands of years. But there is this belief that rhino horn contains mystic or medicinal properties that can cure a range of ills, from hangover to cancer. Why has there become, now there's this sudden demand for rhino horn? Well, this goes back to climate change and pollution. Pollution in the Asian countries has got so bad that in places like Vietnam, 98% of the cancer cases that are now coming to the fore are lung cancer caused by dirty air. So there's a climate and environmental link here. And I'm sure, as you know, that if you are facing a life-threatening sickness, you're going to want to do anything you can to spend a few more days on this earth. And this ancient belief that rhino horn can cure cancer just became a rumor that spread like wildfire. So that was the first reason why there's been this sudden new increase in rhino poaching. But the second reason, and this is the one that I find even more distressing, is that in the growing middle-class wealthy elite of Asia, rhino horn is now seen as a status symbol. And a kg of rhino horn sells for more than $65,000 US on the black market. It is more expensive than gold, diamonds, and cocaine. It is part of an international illegal trade in wildlife trafficking that measures tens of billions of dollars a year, third only after the global trade in arms and drug trafficking. It's big business, ladies and gentlemen. And it's all a myth. Rhino horn does not have any medicinal properties. Science has proved it. The only thing that needs a horn on its head is a rhino. Yet it's become a status symbol. It's like owning a Lamborghini and parking it in your driveway to show everybody that you've made it. Putting a rhino horn in the front of your house to impress your business partners and your friends and to show that you have status in the world has now become something that is driving something that's intrinsically African. And there are a few pockets of rhino left in Asia, very close to extinction. I got involved in this story because of one photograph. I was involved in conservation, but I was working in more community-based conservation, not wildlife and certainly not rhino. And in 2010, a photograph flashed across my computer screen. And to this day, when I was talking to Nick and I was doing the podcast, I was actually a little bit tearful, and I'm going to get tearful again. It showed an image of this beautiful rhino in the prime of his life. And if anybody ever seen a male white rhino, they're pretty big guys. And he was sitting on his haunches, which is very unusual. And his face was a bloody mess. Where his horn and his navel cavity should be was gone. And sitting next to him was a wildlife vet in this photograph, an incredible guy by the name of Dr. William Folds, who's become a good friend of ours. And this picture was flashed around South Africa by Dr. William Folds to start creating awareness that, guys, we have a major problem on our hands. This is not a clean kill. These animals are being shot and savagely hacked apart, many of them while they are still alive. And in that defining moment, the course of my life completely changed. And with a few other people, committed conservationists, we soon found out that there were two major problems facing South Africa, and this is in the early days, this is 2010. Nobody knew that this war was beginning to rage in our game reserves in terms of the public. There was certainly not enough information being shared amongst the different game reserves about the threats they were facing. There was not enough funding for anti-poaching strategies. We'd never faced a crisis where people would come into a game reserve with a hunting rifle or an elephant gun and be willing to shoot not just a rhino, but a ranger as well. So the rangers were hopelessly under-resourced and under-trained. And so we started a program or an organization called Project Rhino. You can read all of this, but I'm just going to pick up a few things that are really, really important to remember here. What is driving this, not just the demand in Asia, but what is driving wildlife poaching in Africa? What is making people within Africa get involved in this? Well, obviously, it's big bucks. There's a lot of money to be made. Lack of political will at the highest level is probably one of our biggest stumbling factors, as is corruption. And very importantly as well, poverty. If you're living in a rural community next to a game reserve and somebody comes along and offers you more money than you've ever going to see in your life, would you not go out there and grab a rhino horn, even if it means a brutal destruction of a live animal? The arms trade and terrorism is also driving rhino horn demand as well. So wherever there are areas of conflict, you will find illegal wildlife trade is increasing. Okay, now how to counter it? Again, I'm not going to be too statistical here, but the big thing is you need boots on the ground. Well-trained, almost paramilitary-style trained rangers who are committed and supported to do a great job. We discovered that aerial surveillance became an enormously fantastic tool in being able to provide eyes in the sky for huge areas. And the use of drone technology has really come into its own and is helping us as conservationists. You need software and technology. We've just been in the Tanzania, and there's the most incredible stuff that's going on in the use of new technology and software that is helping game reserves to provide better protection for their animals and wildlife. Community involvement is a really important thing, and what we are very passionate about as the Kingsley Holgate team is creating awareness amongst the children of the world today. I'm going to show you a video now. Are there any children around? No. I'm warning you now, it's got some graphic content, and forgive me for that, but I think I need to show you what really goes on in the field.
That animal is left to suffer, and they either end up suffocating or dying from the blood loss or the sheer shock of the incident. And it's all for naught. It's for a complete myth.
This torching of these animals, it's horrific. It should not be allowed. It's a shame.
It's everywhere. It's ridiculous. It's uncontrollable. It's bad.
Our rhinos are not medicine. Please, stop this killing.
We don't want to grow up with no rhinos in the wild, so please stop killing them. Leave them alone. Deserve to be killed like this. Please leave them alone.
Our rhinos are not medicine.
Rhino horn does not cure any disease. Please, please, stop killing our rhinos.
This is a message from the children of Africa. Please, stop killing rhinos.
All right, so let's get on to some hopeful stuff. Now I've really shocked you. In 2013, when this whole rhino crisis became a major issue, Kingsley came up with an incredible idea of if we want to reach into communities and start really engaging with the people living around us and creating awareness, who better than not to talk to the children? And it's a very simple project, but my goodness, is it effective. It's called the Rhino Art, Let Our Children's Voices Be Heard campaign. And using a simple piece of paper with the outline of a rhino, and an important part of it is at the bottom of each page, there's a space for them to write their own message, and using soccer in communities as a way of raising awareness about this being an illegal wildlife trade. We've been able to reach over 560,000 kids throughout Africa, and very importantly heard their messages about how they feel about the need to save endangered species, not just rhino, but also elephant. And what is amazing about this project is these little ones that can be from 5 years old to 13 to 15, so many of them color their animals with the flag of the country that they are residing in. So it could be South Africa, it could be Namibia, it could be Swaziland. And last year on our Cape Town to Kathmandu expedition, we were very fortunate to take thousands of messages of support against rhino poaching from children in South Africa to children in Nepal and to the Chitwan National Park, which is an incredible success story of rhinos coming back from extinction. And they've got a growing population of 600 rhino. They haven't lost a rhino to poaching in 5 years. And we were so thrilled to be able to connect children between South Africa and children in Nepal and start an international dialogue between this new generation of kids talking about the need to protect and conserve our wildlife. So here's just some of the little pictures of what they've been able to do. This has now led to the second World Youth Wildlife Summit that's happening in September this year, where 300 kids from around the world are going to be gathering in South Africa to not just learn about what's going on in rhino poaching, but very importantly to start letting their own voices be heard and start playing a role in conservation. And that all came from a simple piece of paper 7 years ago in a rural village outside the Kruger National Park. And it's just proved to be a campaign that just keeps on growing. What we do on our expeditions is we use this campaign to engage with children and communities, but very importantly, we will work with game reserves in those communities to show that wildlife or conservation cares. So we will do malaria prevention work with mums and kids. We will provide water filtration units for places that don't have clean drinking water. We will provide reading glasses for elderly people. So it's all about trying to bring together the need to conserve the world's wildlife and also look after communities. We're just a small team. We're just a bunch of adventurers, but we're trying our little bit. Thank you.